Welcome back. Recently, a letter was written by Mayor Andy Beerman, Police Chief Wade Carpenter, also Park City Manager Matt Diaz, and the members of the Park City Council. This letter was published on parkcity.org. You can find it under the latest news tab. And thanks for joining us. Today we have Andy Beerman and Police Chief Wade Carpenter virtually. We appreciate you both being here.
Good morning, Christine. How are you?
Mayor Beerman, I'm going to start with you. Recently, Park City High School students held a demonstration against police brutality. How did that change you, and what actions did that cause you to take?
Well, I thought it was an excellent demonstration by our students and our youth in the community. They were very organized and thoughtful about it. They reached out to us ahead of time and talked through what they were trying to accomplish and their concerns. They certainly didn't want to replicate some of the riots and violence that was going on around the country or have their event hijacked. They really wanted to put a peaceful message out there. And so it was arranged at Dozier Field. Chief Carpenter and I were both there with many of our other community leaders. And I think it was really poignant. The speakers were excellent. They were passionate about it. And they just showed how much these equity issues and the police brutality issues and the bias and racism matter to this up and coming generation. And I left feeling I left feeling a little bit disappointed that I feel like my generation has let them down, not shown enough leadership and progress, but really encouraged by the potential that I saw there, that they are going to help us get over this hump and become better people in a better society.
And Chief Carpenter, in this letter, you openly denounced the actions of the police officers who were involved in George Floyd's murder. How does this feeling affect your police department during this time?
Well, not just my police department, the entire country. Obviously, this could have been prevented. We know that. We know, and that's what makes it very hard. It's my duty and responsibility as the police chief to make sure I have an obligation that this kind of a tragedy doesn't occur in our community. So our officers obviously feel the sting of these actions of the officers and the actions and inactions of the officers. I think that's important to point out because some of these officers took no action. And that's a tough thing. I mean, it reflects poorly on all of us. And I think that's one of the tough things for us is to truly recognize that there has to be a change, and we really need to be the tip of the spear and make that change.
Mayor Beerman, how will the Park City municipal city officials work with Park City Police Department to stand in solidarity with the Black community?
Well, I think it all starts by listening. We're already a number of years into a community-wide effort to increase inclusion and equity, and I think that sort of all this falls under that umbrella. It's very similar work. And when you hear some of this, you immediately want to go into defensive mode. But I think instead we need to listen to being what's said and self-examine and realize the biases we harbor and admit the fact that there is a lot of systemic racism and start to address that. And specifically, the chief and I have probably had he's heard a lot from me in the last couple of weeks here as we've engaged to look at our own police policies and make sure that we're in line with where we should be. And I am really proud of where we are, as I'm hearing other communities talk about defunding their police departments, which really means they talk about breaking it down to the ground and rebuilding it as community policing. That's something I feel like we're already doing the hard work here, that we are building community policing and that our work is maybe not foundational, but it's more refinement based. And so I'm glad we have a head start, but we're trying to learn from these other communities. I personally am trying to educate myself better on all of our policies here and make sure they're in line. We're preparing that information to share with the community so we have good transparency and we can field their questions and take their ideas, and then we'll make any reforms we need to make. And at the end of the day, we are accountable and we need to be held accountable. So I have tried to remain really receptive, as I think the chief has, to improvements we can make and things we ought to be considering.
And with that being said, this leads to my next question for the chief. We live in a community where we know our police officers by name. We see them in the grocery store. What are the benefits of living in this small town, specifically highlighted in the letter? How is this beneficial for all of us?
Well, I think when you have a name with a face, and I can't tell you, when I go over to the gym, I mean, most of my entire time I'm there, it's conversations with community members. And I appreciate that, and I like that. When you're in the grocery store, you know the individuals you're serving. And I think that it gives us a higher level of accountability to our citizenry. It creates these true relationships of trust where they're invested in us and we're invested in them and their families. My children all went to school here. And so if I went to a school meeting or any of those type of things, I could expect that the community was going to ask me questions and hold me accountable for what we are doing or what we're not doing.
Now, this is a question for both of you. We'll start with Mayor Beerman. Where do we go from here? What needs to change?
Wow. Well, I think we're in, literally when we started our equity discussions, I said this isn't something we're going to do in a couple of months or a couple of years. This is generational work, and I think we continue that. We've partnered with the Park City Community Foundation, which has reached out to many different parts of our community to learn what we need to focus on, and they've come back with we need to focus on housing and pre-K education or early childhood education. We need to focus on inclusion. And those are all areas that we're delving into right now. And that's hard work. And we think by building up access to all of our community members, we can make progress. And then on top of that, I think the police issues are ones that we can work on. Those are issues of leadership and training, and the chief has our full support to tackle into those, and we hope he can continue to improve and refine the department. And then as far as dealing with systemic racism and bias in our community, I think the first challenge is really admitting that it exists and having those difficult conversations and learning from those, and figuring out how we can work through that. Certainly, Park City doesn't have the same diversity of other areas, but we do have more diversity than most people think, and we're an international destination. So we can serve as an example to other places, and we can certainly fix the areas where we live, and that's something I hope will be the hard work the community takes on.
And Chief Carpenter, what about you? What needs to change?
So we're working currently with both the governor's office, Attorney General Sean Reyes, and Senator Thatcher, as well as many other groups, the ACLU, Black Lives Matter, many of the groups in the Salt Lake Valley, to address many of these issues. In fact, I've had conversations with all of these individuals prior to this, but also especially during the last week, to address not only legislation, but also police reform, what that looks like, how it affects all of our stakeholders, our communities. And then on a local level, we've been working on implicit bias training with our officers. We started this, a year and a half ago. And we've been working with Dr. Parker out of the University of Utah. And we're actually looking at hosting a community for phase 2 of our program. And this is something that we had set up before, but with COVID, it kind of pushed us back. A community outreach program that will address implicit bias, both from the officer's perspective and the community perspective. And I think that's very, very important. So we would ask you guys to be watching for that, because I think it would be a really great forum if we can pull it off.
Well, Mayor Andy Beerman, Police Chief Wade Carpenter, we very much appreciate you both taking the time out of your busy schedules to speak with us today here on Park City Television.
Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Christine. Appreciate being here.
We look forward to continuing this conversation in the very near future. If you want to read the entire letter, you can find it at parkcity.org. Click on latest news. We'll be back with more right after this.